everyone, and welcome back to our session here. We're really enjoying today. We had an amazing session there with Deborah from Dyslexia Box, and we've got two amazing speakers coming up for you now. We're going to start with Jack from Neuropool, and of course we've got Laura just after Jack that we're going to bring up as well. So we got Jack here. How are you, Jack? Are you all right?
Yeah, good, thanks. Excited to be here and meet everyone, and really looking forward to the rest of the day.
That's fine. So as I've got here, Jack is an autistic and ADHD entrepreneur. You're the CEO, I believe, of Neuropool. And I'm going to hand over to Jack to do his talk, and then we'll bring Laura in later. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Jack Dyrhauge, the founder of Neuropool. And at Neuropool, we believe the future of work is neurodiverse. And we're on a mission to get 1,000 neurodiverse people into work by 2025. So we're just going to give you a bit of an idea of how we're going to do that, the strategies we use with our employers, and how we're building neurodiverse talent pools all across the UK. So what is Neuropool? And what is really our mission? We exist to connect neurodiverse people to the UK job market. We do this through tailored mentoring, job coaching, and specialized inclusive recruitment. And we mobilize this by our consultancy and partners to change the perception of neurodiverse talent amongst employers. Now, why do we do this? Because sadly, neurodiverse people face a lot of barriers, not only in education, but when entering the workplace. And as there are 1 in 7, maybe up to 1 in 6% of the world's population are neurodiverse, that means a lot of us are unemployed in the UK. And what that means for the UK in terms of adults is there's 6 million neurodiverse adults in the UK. And of that, we know around 1 million are either underemployed or unemployed. And it is a known factor around 500,000 of these adults are autistic and definitely unemployed. Now, this results in a drastic impact in the economy, not only in lost potential earnings, but in direct costs as well, and innovation. But more importantly, it leaves over 1 million people not in employment, not in meaningful work, and not able to actually contribute and have a meaningful life. So how we try to tackle that is by connecting our neurodiverse talent pools to our corporate clients. But we try to do this at scale, because the big problem is how do we keep a steady stream of neurodiverse talent coming to us when we don't necessarily know where to find them, how to onboard and best support them. And so it's really a new area for employers. So, I hope today we can really show you, one, what are some of the strategies and short-term wins that you can get, and how can you work with companies like Neuropool, Neurovation, and others attending to really enhance your D&I strategy, but also to start actually attracting neurodiverse talent. So if we look at actually how Neuropool works and what we do for our users and our community, we offer a free service to neurodiverse job seekers where they can sign up, build a profile, and apply a network for jobs within our community of partners and corporate partners. Now, more importantly, they're able to attend events and workshops with their mentors and actually get one-on-one mentorship through the interview process up until they start their job, where we'll then actually help get them started for work and support them through their role up to 24 months. So for us, it's really for the candidates, is around how can we help you, one, find the role that you're really good for, get you into that job, because you might need to do 100, 150 plus applications. We are working in a very turbulent market, so it's not going to be easy, but we will guide you through that process. So that's a bit about candidates. Now, how do we help our corporate clients? So really for HR and recruitment teams, it's about building up that steady stream of neurodiverse talent. But before we do that, there might be some education or training that's needed, or just more awareness within the organization, because a lot of HR and recruitment professionals are worried about maybe saying the wrong thing or not having the right support in place for their line managers. So what we do is ensure that we can help you explore hiring neurodiverse talent, but also give the right tools and training to your team. So alongside bringing you to events and careers fairs to engage with talent, we can help your HR teams with guidance and workshops, helping develop your talent pool alongside delivering recruitment services. Now, a big problem that employers face is, yes, one, where do we find neurodiverse talent? And how do we actually commit to hiring 10 to 20% of our workforce to be neurodiverse? You need a steady stream of incoming talent. So really the message to employers is, if you are at the exploratory stages of your neurodiversity journey, then reach out to me or Laura, find out how you can make some short-term wins, and in the longer term, how you can build up a steady stream of talent. just an idea of what we've done over the last 18 months. So we're one of our corporate partners, Amberside Advisors. They initially engaged with us to help them with recruitment of bringing on neurodiverse graduates. And actually, after that went so well, the managers on the ground started to actually request not just support for themselves, but support for the graduates on the ground. We actually brought in Neurovation to come and deliver management training to around 40 people in the company. And over the last 3 months, Laura will go in a bit more depth into what was actually delivered in these sessions. But alongside recruitment, it's crucial to ensure that the managers and the people on the ground are actually going to have the adequate support from HR professionals working in this space. So what was really good about working with Amberside is not only did they see the need to bring in more neurodiverse talent to their workforce, but they really saw that actually their managers and the directors also needed to have some training and share some awareness on this. So I'll let Laura cover the rest of that later. But what we do with our university partners is we run employability programs over the course of a year, so that whether you're an employer looking for interns or graduates, you're able to come in, attend events, speak to this audience, and actually get them to come and apply for you when you are opening up your roles. So it's really about how do you as a business start, being more present in these neurodiverse communities and actually able to, let's say, inspire them from an earlier age instead of them just arriving to you as a professional once they've graduated. Just to give you an idea of who we're working with and some of the clients that we've delivered talent to over the last 12 months and training, we're really lucky to be working with such amazing clients. And a core part of this is one, employees being ready to make change, but also to be able to see change and actually have that delivered, because there's no point talking about change or inclusion if you can't actually see it changing on the ground in your own company. So we're really honored to be working with companies that, one, are ready to make change, but two, actually are ready to see that change on the ground. So who's actually in our team in Neuropool? We're very lucky to have a large proportion of our team are actually neurodiverse. We have Ellie Middleton, who's our head of community, who's actually starting this week. Laura Bell, who's the director of Neurovation, but also works with us as an HR advisor. We also have Abigail Downey, who's one of our community volunteers. And in recruitment, we have Jack Antonia Diaz, and helping us with our user experience and platform development, we're working with Daniel Pidcock from Gleanly, and also Jake Colston. So just to give you an overview of what Neuropool really is about, it's one, to help you as an HR and recruitment team develop your neurodiverse workforce, build a steady stream of talent, and also ensure that you have an audience of neurodiverse applicants who know and trust you. So really glad that we could be here today. And Laura will cover a bit more later on around more the HR and the training. But if anybody has any questions today around the recruitment, how you can get involved with potential upcoming events, or actually any questions around neurodiversity recruitment, then happy to answer any questions now or after today's talk.
On the screen you can still see Jack's details there, of course. So Jack, do you want us to stop sharing your screen so we can see you full screen, so we can have a quick conversation about that? That's brilliant, thank you very much. So if you want to put a question in the question box, please do. I've got it open on my screen. I'm going to attempt to read some questions. As you probably don't know, Jack, that I'm severely dyslexic as well, and run my own business as well. So trying to read questions is going to be interesting for me. So it's fascinating is of what you do. It's really interesting as well when you bring that slide up for me, that I follow probably about 3 or 4 members of your staff on LinkedIn, and very recently that made me smile. It did. So, but no, it's fascinating how you're kind of thinking of ways of ensuring that we are looking at that positives rather than the negatives of that. So that's really useful. It is. So I'm just having a look to see if there's any questions in the question box. And it says here, so this sounds great. Would love to contact yourselves to be in touch. So that's really good to see. So as it is that Jack has put his details on there. Are there certain industries Are there certain industries, sectors more open to neurodiverse recruitment and culture change than others? So have you seen that, Jack? That's a good question there.
Yes. So on the recruitment, yes, I think predominantly tech businesses will have a focus on hiring neurodiverse candidates. If you look at anything within science, engineering, that will have a larger proportion of focus on neurodiverse recruitment. So yes, for the industry. In terms of culture change, I think that's really down to the CEO and the leadership of the company, and whether they are ready to make change. So sadly, there isn't a unified answer for that second part.
No, that is very true. It is. I think that's the thing. It is. For me, seeing some large companies actually look at that culture change is really important, isn't it? Because it does mean that we can move things forward. So I've seen that with other ones. Do you find that certain roles suit people with neurodiversity? That's a good question. Did you hear that, Jack?
Yeah, so the connection was a bit funny, but I think that yes, there are some roles that are very well suited for neurodiverse people. We all know the stereotypes of coding, data analysis. However, what I've learned from Neuropool over the last few years is that we can really defy any stereotype. I mean, I'm autistic, ADHD. I cannot code. I cannot use Excel. I wish I had those skills, but sadly I don't. And I know there's a lot of other autistic people out there who probably won't even like using a computer. So yes, neurodiverse people can be very good at data roles and, very deep work roles. But however, that's maybe because we've come to those environments because they're not as stressful as, let's say, other working environments. So, if you're a coder, people tend to not interrupt you for 8 to 12 hours. That sounds quite nice. Whereas if you're working as an admin assistant, you might have always people chasing you. So yes and no.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating, isn't it? Because I know that for me in my working life as a severe dyslexic and with tendencies of ADHD and ASD, I started as a youth worker, which is very practical, very much working on the ground, then moving into actually being a labourer on a building site because I needed a job. Now, being dyspraxic, pushing a wheelbarrow was quite hilarious, but I still did it, and I learned skills there that allowed me to do things in later life, like do an okay job of DIY in my house. And then moving on to working in retail and then working for the British Dyslexia Association, where I will never forget when the CEO said, if there's a problem, she told a load of young people that if there's a problem in the office or there's a problem that needs solving, the first person should come to is me because of my problem solving skills, and that was quite nice to hear it. So but being made redundant in 2016 and applying for 17 jobs and never getting a job, yes, working for myself was the best thing I ever did, but it is interesting how things have changed in the last 5 years and how we've moved forward. So thank you very much. So hello, Laura. That's Brent. It's always good when technology works, isn't it? And you're there. So Laura, do you want to just introduce yourself for me, please, of who you are? Because my laptop has closed down and I can't find my script. Of course, being typical dyslexic, they're properly organised. That's stereotypical, and I'm allowed to say it because it's me that does it, not anyone else. So do you want to introduce yourself, Laura? And then what we'll do, actually, what we'll do is we'll just go straight into your presentation. So over to you, Laura. We're going to zoom into you now, and then you can introduce yourself, and your presentation will appear on the screen in a second.
Lovely. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here and hope everybody is enjoying the sessions so far. My name is Laura Bell, and essentially I describe myself as being on a mission to improve neurodiversity and inclusion in the workplace. I have a background in HR and a lifelong interest in psychology, along with personal experience and interest in autism, ADHD, and the broader sort of neurodiversity. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but I'll move on to my presentation. So I've, obviously just introduced briefly who I am, but what we call late diagnosed, i.e. I had absolutely no idea that I was neurodivergent until my children were diagnosed. And this is actually a very common story, particularly for neurodivergent women. And there's certainly been some, mainstream media exposure on some of these mums recently. So even from a young age, I knew I was some kind of alien from another planet. That's how I felt. And I couldn't understand why I found some things so difficult that other people found easy, and also why some of my interests were quite different to other people as well. And I'd sometimes get frustrated feeling like I was an outsider in so many ways, never quite fitting in. But understanding both my children's and my own neurodiversity came as a huge relief. It also came with a bit of an emotional roller coaster, I'm not going to lie, but mostly relief. And sort of 5-6 years later, I'm feeling a really positive place. And mostly it gave me a brand new special interest. So I decided to use my knowledge and experience, along with my background in HR, and set up Neurovation in order to improve inclusion in the workplace, so that my children would not be disadvantaged by the time they were of working age. And really, I've got Jack to kind of thank for this a bit as well, because I met Jack a couple of years ago and I just found him so inspiring with what he's doing with Neuropool that I thought, yeah, I'm going to go for it as well. And we've been working together quite closely on a number of projects, which has worked really well, bringing on different kind of strengths and interests into, some of the projects we've done. So, yeah, thank you for that, Jack. I do a mixture of coaching with Neurovation. I do coaching, training, advising employers, advising HR teams a lot, because obviously that's kind of my career background, and also supporting and mentoring and coaching individuals in workplaces. And it's something I'm really starting to see more and more of as people's awareness of neurodiversity grows, as people start to get diagnosed themselves as adults. It's something that I'm just starting to see slightly snowball, and other people might also be seeing that experience. And along with working with Neuropool for a couple of years as well, I've also become a neurodiversity advisor for Advance Autism and ADHD Trust at a neurodiversity at work project. It's a pilot project in Hertfordshire aimed at getting at least 80 neurodivergent people preferably into work or some other sort of progression towards work, whether it's training or something to that effect. So yeah, I wear lots of hats and do lots of things, and I feel like ADHD is really kind of a superpower in that sense. So I'm kind of really focused on inclusive management practices. That's the area that I really want to change, and I really think could have the most impact at work for people. Bear with me, I just need to find my clicker. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So as Jack mentioned, we ran some management training. And while it was tailored to the organisation that we worked with, the basis of it really could be done in other workplaces. And listed there, you can see the sort of topics that we covered for that particular organisation. And I think it's really important that we consider neurodiversity as part of the broader diversity, equality and inclusion agenda and strategy. And that has been quite a hot topic. But sometimes neurodiversity is actually missed off that agenda. And I think, we need to kind of really consider that, because it is an area that is growing in awareness across workplaces. And I think the other point is we're human beings, we're messy, we don't necessarily fit into neat boxes. And I think we need to consider intersectionality. So particularly when it comes to protected characteristics, somebody could have a couple of protected characteristics, including being neurodivergent, and that can actually make them more vulnerable in the workplace or outside of the workplace. So I think it is important to consider that too. At the management training sessions, we briefly recapped on neurodiversity, because we'd actually already presented about neurodiversity at a company day previous to the training, which had kind of led to us doing more work with the company and them really wanting to embrace neurodiversity and, take on some of the training and practices that we were recommending. We talked a bit about executive functioning and sensory processing, things that I'm going to define briefly in a moment. And we looked at communication differences between neurotypes, because that can be something that understanding that can really help to diffuse a lot of workplace issues, because a lot of it is around miscommunication. And we really promoted a message of inclusive workplaces, and that's the bit I'm going to cover in a bit more detail today, because this training was over 2 days and I have probably about 10 to 15 minutes left. So I'm really just going to touch on some of these areas briefly. Okay, so I just wanted to explain a little bit about executive functioning and sensory processing, because I think they're really good areas to be aware of in a workplace, and they are the areas that almost have the biggest impact on neurodivergent people at work, I would say, because executive processing essentially are the mental skills that we're using every day to learn. So it could be our working memory, any flexible thinking, self-control, and we use those at work all the time. And sometimes we can have a spiky profile, what I call a spiky profile in these areas. So where you could have somebody who's got very good flexible thinking, very creative, imaginative, can come up with lots of different ways to solve problems. They could have very poor time management. So what's important is kind of being aware of those areas that you have real strengths in, and then looking at how somebody might need a bit of support around the areas that they don't have such great strengths in. And actually using technology can be a beneficial tool to overcome some of those. So it's really good to kind of understand that. And then with sensory processing, that's really about the registration and interpretation of sensory input from the environment or your body. So it could be, knowing when you're hungry or thirsty, feeling too hot, too cold, or having more sensitivity to light. So sometimes in an office where you've got fluorescent lighting, that can be almost painful for some people who have more sort of sensitivity around sensory processing. So considering that kind of environment that somebody's working in is really important. So to kind of start our thinking about inclusive workplaces, I thought it would be good just to cover briefly and to understand the base legal requirements of the Equality Act and making reasonable adjustments with regard to disability, because that's something that's, it's a legal requirement. This is the base legal requirement for all employers. And if you're in HR, this is probably not going to be a surprise to you, but just to cover briefly, a reasonable adjustment is a change to remove or reduce the effect of an employee's disability so they can do their job, or a job applicant's disability when applying for a job. So it's to remove or reduce the effect, i.e. it's to make sure that people are on a level playing field and are not disadvantaged. And it's really important that they don't have to actually even be employees when you're doing this. This could be candidates that are coming for interviews or candidates that are applying for roles. So it's absolutely fundamental. And that reasonable adjustment could be to the workplace or the way that things are done, or it could be to, have somebody to help the employee to do something. So it could be, or the job applicant. So somebody perhaps attending an interview to help with any communication. And there are literally hundreds of different reasonable adjustments that could be provided. And as everyone has different requirements, we're all individuals, so we will all have different requirements at work. And again, it sort of depends on what your kind of strengths and weaknesses are, perhaps. And listed here are just a couple of examples, some that are quite commonly used, some that actually we might find in a workplace anyway, which is great if we do. Flexible working, who hasn't been working flexibly over the last 2 years? So some of these adjustments, they cost either nothing or very little. Some of them are actually, from my perspective, just good management practice, like having regular one-to-ones. And some might cost some money, but a lot of employers aren't aware that there is an access to work funding from the government that people can apply for to help with those, offset some of those costs around any support that needs to be put into place. But I think instead of reasonable adjustments, I think we need to go further. And I think we need to look at how we make workplaces more inclusive overall. Because if you aren't intentionally including everyone, you're most likely to be unintentionally excluding someone. So I thought I might use the employee life cycle. Again, I think we have a kind of HR audience, and I think it's something that you'll be familiar with. So I'm just going to touch on some of those areas and talk about how we could perhaps look at making them more inclusive. So firstly, in strategy, I would encourage all employers to make sure neurodiversity is in the HR and diversity and inclusion strategies. As I mentioned earlier, quite often it isn't. And also, I would say include it in the facilities management strategy. So I mentioned about differences in sensory processing and how much the environment can really impact somebody and can be quite draining for people. So I think it's important to consider there too. In terms of attracting people, on your website, state openly that you're an inclusive employer, you embrace neurodiversity and disability, and then, if you can, talk about how you do this. So possibly a couple of case studies, maybe from some of your neurodivergent employees, employee resource groups that you might have that support employees, and any neurodiversity champions that you might have. Recruitment, obviously this is Jack's expertise here, and as he's kind of talked about and I talk about, we want recruitment processes to really be inclusive and to kind of be recruiting more neurodivergent people. So you could, for example, have a commitment to interview all neurodivergent candidates that meet the basic criteria. Another thing that can make interviews more accessible is by providing interview questions sort of 10, 15 minutes before the interview, so that somebody can actually read through and process that information. That can be really, really helpful for neurodivergent people, but actually it would be helpful for anybody. You might like to consider a work trial rather than just relying on an interview, so that that person can really show you how they can do the job, rather than just expecting them to be able to talk about it, which might not be, as great for particularly autistic people or, other people too. And I think really just, in that interview, don't have huge expectations about social norms. So don't necessarily expect eye contact from people. Allow people time if they need breaks and process. So you're really looking to get the best out of people. In terms of onboarding, I think, just a good structured and clear induction, possibly using different formats. So some people might respond better to information in writing. Some people might respond better to a video that they can watch a bit about the company. But I think that's really important. In terms of learning and development, obviously everyone is different, making time to really understand all of the strengths and weaknesses of your employees, but also particularly your neurodivergent employees who may have this kind of spiky profile where they have, real that could be above and beyond most members of your team, or could have challenges that really do need a lot of support at work. So really kind of considering their learning and development. And also considering having everybody in the team trained about neurodiversity as well, so that people really understand, and around communication differences. That can be really helpful to kind of diffuse any issues or disputes before they even arise. Reward and recognition and benefits. An autistic employee might feel an end of week celebration at a noisy pub more of a punishment than a reward. Some autistic people might love it, but some might not. So I think aim to just have an inclusive range of opportunities for people to socialise. Things that are kind of activity-based could be quite a nice way of people feeling a little bit more socially comfortable if they've got an activity to focus on. And find ways to reward people within working hours as well, because some people like to really have that separation of work and home. In terms of progression and performance, everybody progresses at their own rate and their own space. And, I think that's really important just to remember that, you're working with individuals here. We're not robots. We don't all work at the same pace. So really just looking at a kind of person-centred approach. And retention or exiting people. Obviously, we've had a lot of change. I know it's been hard for the HR profession over the last couple of years, particularly with all of the change and people feeling burned out. And that's also the same for neurodivergent people at work a lot of the time anyway. So really sort of asking yourselves about how you're kind of looking after your people, how you're taking them through change is really important. A lot of autistic people really struggle with transitions. So any sort of clear, supportive consultation for change is absolutely essential, not just for autistic people, of course, for everybody, but it can really make the difference to, moving people through change. And actually somebody who thrives on change, maybe somebody who's got ADHD could kind of thrive on change, and they could actually be really fantastic ambassadors for change. So again, looking about how you play to people's strengths here. So, I mean, to summarise, inclusive workplaces really play to people's strengths. They have the right balance of structure and flexibility. Recognise that we are messy humans. We're not robots that fit into neat boxes. Offer a range of different communication methods. We all have preferences for different communication methods anyway. Provide management training so that managers really understand how to play to the strengths of their teams, and also to support those that are having challenges. We'll need that bit of extra support. And the real bonus here, the spillover benefit, is that this benefits everybody. This is not just about, supporting neurodivergent people. Of course, this is going to support neurodivergent people, but it's not going to be at the expense of people who aren't neurodivergent. It's going to really benefit everybody. We all want to have a supportive manager. We all want to have regular one-to-ones. We could all benefit from having a mentor. So yeah, it's kind of things to kind of think about in terms of how to make workplaces a bit more inclusive. And if you do that, you're really halfway there to supporting neurodivergent people in the workplace. And supporting people to be their best selves at work really increases confidence, promotes better learning and development, job satisfaction, retention, efficiency, and they're all good things that employers want. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions?
That was fascinating, Laura. Thank you very much for that. So, it's interesting for me what you were saying there, especially on your last couple of slides, especially about like how people react when you go out when you're going out at the end of the week or things like that. And it's really interesting for me because for me, I like to be. I wouldn't prefer to go to the pub. I would prefer to go climbing or go whitewater rafting at the end of the week rather than actually going to the pub. And it's like thinking about my life as someone with neurodivergent. I would always be the person that would want to have. I'd be the one that holds the list for Christmas dinner of what everyone's having. I'd be the one that would be ensuring everyone's there. I'd be the one that'd be the quiz master because I think that concept of being in control. Is sometimes that feeling of that if you're not in control, then it gets more stressful and harder for you to do stuff. So it's fascinating. There is some questions coming in. So if you are writing a question, put them in the chat box, and my team in front of me are going to put them forward to it. But I think it's really interesting. So. That concept of culture and that concept there of saying about that you were talking there on your last slide about appraisals and kind of that one-to-one thing. It's that you feel that's quite important, don't you, about working with anyone, not just people who are neurodivergent.
Yeah. And I think it is, good management practice really. And a lot of this is kind of sort of things that HR professionals are always trying to promote, good management and people practices. And I know it can be hard in, smaller organisations sometimes, or busy organisations that are, struggling to at least just meet the needs of the job, let alone thinking about how to support their people. But it is so important because you'd rather make sure that people are working efficiently to the best of their ability than actually just struggling with the job, because that's not going to make the company more efficient. So making the time to do those people management practices is really key.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me of being now a school governor and running a company with members of staff and having to think about all these things. Now, when I worked for other people, it was really kind of like, well, you just expected it, and that's the thing. What's your feeling around the wording? And this is I've heard this a little bit around this concept when people say the word performance management. How do you feel that affects people with neurodivergent or neurodiverse?
Yeah, I think that can feel like a lot of pressure. Because it's very much focused on, what you can do. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people already feel that they fail in many ways without having that added pressure of performance management. I think it's quite a scary word. And I've always, personally, I've always focused more on performance management as a kind of learning and development tool and area, and really kind of promoted it through, this is about learning and development rather than, we're kind of like, scrutinizing your performance, which is how I think that can come across. And it can be absolutely terrifying. I've had neurodivergent people in one-to-ones and appraisals, sorry, excuse me, that have burst into tears because just from the few, the actual pressure of being there. So trying to make those sort of processes a little bit more inclusive and supportive will be really helpful. And I think it's if you want to get the best out of people, which is what it should be aimed at, then make people feel like they can do their best.
No, I think that's brilliant. What I'm doing is I'm looking at my computer's got all the questions coming up. So I'm trying to do this thing this thing that we say that is not always easy, and that is trying to multitask, which is probably not the easiest thing. I'm just looking through some of the questions and seeing what it says. Laura, are you? I'm just trying to see one here. There's lots of positive feedback here. I am. Just going to do that. Are you particularly Laura, are you particularly working in organisations that are supporting neurodiverse people directly? So in Neuropool, is that what you're doing directly, or have you got a wide range of companies you're working with?
Really a wide range, and I quite like to start with companies who actually have no idea about neurodiversity, because it gives us an opportunity to teach people a bit more about it and raise that awareness. But so it's been a mixture though. So I've done quite a lot of that, talking to people about what neurodiversity is, because a lot of people now have heard about neurodiversity, but they don't really understand what it is. So really being able to explain it, and I tend to try and keep it quite simple, talking about spiky profile and sort of briefly covering neurodivergent conditions, keeping it very positive. But then I have also what I'm finding now is a lot of HR people are coming to me and asking for support with maybe an employee or an issue that's happened at work, because they just don't understand how best to help that person. So I'm kind of doing some one-to-one work there as well. So it's really across the range. But I've done a lot of talking about it, I can say that.
That's great. It actually leads on to this next question. It's really good there. Is there another method for appraisals and reflective writing that can be differentiated for neurodiverse people?
It's a really good question, and I think a lot of it comes down to the company culture, because if you've got a culture where you've got a manager who is supportive and is constantly sort of checking in, going into an appraisal situation could be quite different, because you could actually feel like quite comfortable with that. It could just be done in a normal one-to-one, but hey, let's have a little reflection over what we've done over the past few months. And I think it should also be quite up to date, like just over the past few months, rather than trying to remember what we've done for the last 12 months. And I think a lot of companies have moved away from the sort of 12 months and do focus a bit more on quarters. So I think, a lot of it is about what that relationship is with the people that you work with anyway. If you have a manager that you never see, and then you've got this performance management appraisal in your diary for 3 months' time, and you have no relationship with that manager, that can be a terrifying situation walking into that. So, we can still use the same sort of procedures and process that we need to do as companies and to help manage people, but it's just about how you do them and about how that culture enhances people's ability to be themselves, ability to feel comfortable with those processes, making sure that people know what's expected in there, what's going to happen in those sessions. So that's sort of how I would play it, because I do get sometimes backlash from people saying, well, we can't just get rid of the performance appraisal system. And I say, well, I'm not telling you to do that. What I'm saying to you is there's a really good way of doing this that actually could be more supportive and could actually then benefit everybody. That would kind of be my view on it.
Yeah, Mandy's just written, an appraisal is always a two-way street and should be an equal decision.
Yeah, I think it is a two-way street. Absolutely. It shouldn't be about a manager coming in and saying, these are all the things you've done well and these are all the things you haven't done very well. And also that appraisal, again, I can't stress it enough. There should be no surprises in there. If somebody hasn't performed well and it was from 3 months ago and then you're bringing it up in the appraisal, that's not good management. If there's any issues, you need to be addressing them a lot earlier. So that appraisal should not be anything of a surprise to the employee or the manager either, because also if the employee is then really unhappy, then that manager hasn't been doing their job because they don't know the employee is really unhappy. So it's about more regular checking in with people.
I think it's interesting for me. I worked in an organisation many years ago, and my line manager changed. So my first line manager, very open, he would stop his job to talk to me and have that conversation about it. And the new line manager was very kind of rigid with his time, could only really concentrate on one thing at a time. So couldn't work with my neurodiversity and I couldn't work with his. It was really interesting, that dynamic, when you think about it now. But the one thing that made it really apparent was he says, I kind of talked about this thing. He says, put a meeting in my diary, put a meeting in his diary, and we sat in this meeting. He said, what do you want to talk about? I went, I know, that was a week ago, I've forgotten. And,
yeah.
And that was the thing. It's like, there's no point. I don't know what it was. I've dealt with it now. That was then. This is now. No, it's fascinating. Now, you've been an amazing talk you've done there. So I've really enjoyed listening to you there talking about things. And actually, so far today, both with you, with Jack, and with Deborah, you've kind of come on across this concept of culture is really important. And I think that's going to continue throughout the day. That culture is a really big, important thing, which is really, I think for me, that's really a positive thing. So thank you very much, Laura.